A toxic workplace does not only break people, it breaks profits as well. The signs are subtle, but they will be devastating, from bullying and manipulation to burnout, as well as mass resignations. In an economy already struggling with stress and low productivity, silence about workplace abuse is costing both health and revenue. To unpack the human and financial toll of unhealthy work cultures, we're joined by Professor Renata, the head of the MBA program in healthcare leadership at Stellenbosch Business School. A very good morning to you, Professor Schoeman, and thank you for joining us. You know, when you describe a toxic workplace, what are the warning signs that leaders should never ignore?
One of the first things we see is disengagement from staff, absenteeism, presenteeism, lower productivity, higher staff turnover, and then also clear communication difficulties such as gaslighting or excessive gossiping.
You know, your research links silence to toxicity, and I just wonder, why do employees so often choose to resign instead of reporting the matter?
So what we see, up to 60% of people that has been bullied in the workplace choose to remain quiet. And it has to do with various factors. The one is the current socioeconomic climate. If they talk, they're scared that they might be fired or retrenched, and where to go then? Secondly, they're scared of being alienated from the peer group and not receiving the support that they need from their co-workers. Furthermore, fear of not being considered for future promotions. And then also feeling voiceless and not really know where to go, not being aware that there should be policies in the workplace that do protect them.
I'm going to ask you a two-part question for this one, because I'm quite keen to know, in South Africa, are there, one, particular industries where this occurs more often than not, and two, leadership styles where this problem is most entrenched?
Yes, so there's two things that we know. We do not have all the data in the South African environment, although there's a couple of studies running at the moment, mining industry, building sector, but we have quite a few in terms of the white-collar sector, like financial sectors and so forth. However, if we look at previous studies that we looked at toxic workplace environment, it's all the areas where there's still quite a hierarchical structure. So unfortunately, healthcare is one of the worst affected of the industries, and that is also in line with the international research. So healthcare in the white collar, but then also where there's more menial workers in terms of building, mining, and so forth. But that is very company specific, because we also have companies in those areas that's really doing brilliant and might even be some of the top employers in the country.
And in terms of leadership styles, I mean, are there any specific areas that you're able to share with our viewers?
Yes, we have to bear in mind that up to 1 out of 4 CEOs might display what we call narcissistic traits. I have to warn and caution to people not to use the term loosely. You can't go ahead and say, oh, but that person is such a narcissist. That is a condition that you diagnose professionally by a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. But that charisma and that forceful leadership style might also be positive in a workplace environment. The problem is when we see real gaslighting, bullying, aggression, whether verbal, luckily not so much physical, that we do see that there's an increase in terms of the toxic workplace environment, and especially also where there is manipulation of the communication lines, people that never take any responsibility but always want to take the credit. Some of the local research have shown that the toxic behavior that's most common and one of the most damaging in the South African aspect is sarcasm. Sarcasm has no place in any organization.
No, that's very interesting that you say that. And a zero tolerance policy, you know, what does it look like in practice? A zero tolerance policy to anyone creating toxicity in the environment. What does it look like, and how can small organizations realistically enforce something like that?
I think it's very important to be aware of what laws there are to protect both employers and employees in the country, and especially the laws in terms of harassment and bullying in the workplace. There's also the Code for Good Conduct and Good Practice, which clearly specify the policies that has to be available in every organization. And people and staff, employees, employers have to be trained in these policies and what is in place. So firstly, when we talk about zero tolerance, it needs to be there, these policies, and people need to know about it. Secondly, if there has been an incident, it must be clearly investigated, if necessary by a third neutral party. But there also need to be action taken. It can't just be swept under the carpet. People need to know that if an incident happens, there will be action taken and there will be consequences. Secondly, ongoing training in terms of how can we communicate better, how can we be more cohesive, how can we create a psychological safe workspace. I often remind people that safe doesn't mean nice. A psychological safe environment is important, but work won't always be nice. It won't always just be nice people. So we have to understand the difference between the two as well. And then also what has to be included is in terms of mental health awareness. Where can people get help in terms of exposure to bullying? We know that there's significant psychological consequences. Where is the professional support? Where can the organization also support? But once again, also to remind employees that you have a responsibility to report. It's way too easy to remain silent. It's difficult to speak up, but otherwise we just continue in this culture of silence, which can definitely ruin not only the mental health and wealth of the organization, but also the financial bottom line.
Professor Renata Skuman, thank you so much for that. She joins us from the Stellenbosch Business School, where she's the head of the MBA program in healthcare leadership.